of how you're going to look at this resentment. This is my course. I realize that the people, what I wrote in column 1, who wronged me, column 2, were perhaps spiritually sick. Though I did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed me, they, like me, are sick too. And I start to get introduced to an idea here. Here's the idea. Is it possible, Mark, that these people did not wake up one day and intentionally decide to pursue a course of action to hurt you? Is that possible, Mark? Is it possible, Mark, that the extent to which you are asleep, dreaming you're awake, or spiritually sick is the extent to which you will harm others? Is that possible, Mark? It's trying to introduce me to some things. It's trying to introduce me to something else. Mark, you're sitting in judgment on someone who's spiritually sick. So are you. See? You actually believe someone could have acted different. I want to go back to this issue of choice and how it ties into inventory. I have never in my lifetime made a conscious choice to harm another human being. And they haven't done that with me either. And if you're sitting here thinking people in your life have made conscious choices to harm you, you've missed the intent of what this is trying to tell you. And it is impossible to get taken to a state of forgiveness, love, and compassion. When I understood there's nothing but oneness, and if I harm you, I harm me, I really understood what the book said. Anyone who would pursue a course of action to create any harm to another human being is doing so because they're spiritually sick. This is very much being played out in our lives right now. What is taking place is not based on people who are spiritually well. They are spiritually sick. They have no concept that there's nothing but oneness. And if I harm you, I harm me. So it goes on to say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask God to help me show these people the same tolerance, pity, and patience I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. That's a powerful, powerful instruction. Take all these people you're resentful at and imagine they're laying in a bed dying of cancer or some horrible disease. What would you do then? Let's say they said something or did something with a body racked with cancer, right? Would you be forgiving? Would you have compassion? Would you take it personal? No, you wouldn't, just like me. When a person offends, I say to myself, this is a sick man or a sick woman. How can I be helpful to him or her? God, you save me from being angry, thy will be done, and I need to avoid retaliation or argument. Why? Because I would not treat sick people that way. We get angry at sick people and ourselves. Heard a statement one time. If you said to me what I said to me, I'd have to kill you. Right? See, I have to stop doing that with myself as well. Goes on to say, referring to my list again, and this is the fourth column, putting out of my mind the wrongs others have done, I'm going to look for my own mistakes. Mistakes. The extent to which you are spiritually asleep is the extent to which you'll continue to make more and more mistakes. My experience has been what the big book said. Over the years, I have made spiritual progress. Not perfection, progress. I make less mistakes every year that I am sober. Every year that I submit to God, to this way of life, I make less mistakes. There are less amends. I put out less harm. I am more loving. I am more kind. I am more compassionate with myself and with you. Where have I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation is not my fault, I'm going to disregard the other person involved entirely. And that does mean entirely. That does mean entirely. I want to tie back to something. The greater your need, go back to the name that you wrote in column 1 and column 2. The greater your need for that person or institution to fulfill that need is the extent to which you cannot do this. The greater your attachment is the extent to which you cannot do this. Where am I to blame? The inventory is mine, not the other man's. When I saw my faults, I list them before me in black and white. I admit my wrongs honestly, and I'm willing to set these matters straight. I'll let Joe talk a little bit about resentment inventory.
I have a great story about resentment. Guy's been sober 30 years, and in those 30 years, he's become a hunter. And his whole life, he's had a dream about this one certain rifle. 50 years old, 30 years sober, his wife gives him this rifle. It's like a dream come true. Of course, being a good alcoholic, he's going to go all the way to Alaska, and he's going to shoot a bear. Goes to Alaska, first bear he sees, boom, blows it away. There's a tap on his shoulder. It's a bigger bear. This big bear says, this is also a story about whether to die an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Bigger bear taps him on the shoulder and goes, sorry, that was my cousin you just killed. You have two choices. I maul you to death or I have my way with you. He thinks about it for a minute. It's not an easy alternative, but he lets the bear have his way with him. It's a little painful. He goes home. It takes about a week to recover. And now the resentment is deep. He's refeeling it and refeeling it and refeeling it. Now he's got to go back and find that specific bear. Goes back, finds that bear. Boom. There's a tap on the shoulder. There's a bigger bear. The bear says, you have two choices. I maul you to death or I have my way with you really rough. He thinks about it for a minute. It's not an easy alternative to face. He lets the bear have his way. It's really painful. He goes home. It takes him a month to recover. And now the resentment is festering. He's got to go back and find that bear. Then it's the next bear. Then it's the next bear. About the fifth time, he's up there and he now has to find the biggest white polar bear you can imagine. Finds him. Boom. Now there's the hugest bear you can possibly imagine. Taps him on the shoulder and says, that was my brother you just killed, and we've been watching you for a while, and we realize you're obviously not here for the hunting, are you? I have another story about how we make fun of people with the same thing we have. It's a story about a strong mother. Strong, assertive mother with a perfect child, of course. And of course, her child is a little more perfect than any other child. He has a small speech impediment, but no one will admit it because he's perfect. She puts him out on the street, catch the bus pulls up, the door opens, the boy goes, bus driver slams the door, drives off. Next day, she puts him out there on the corner, the bus pulls up, the boy goes, slams the door, drives off. This time he tells his mother is like enraged. Nobody's going to treat my son like that, blah, blah, blah. Puts him out a corner the next morning and hides in the bushes. The bus pulls up, the door opens, the boy goes, driver gives him the finger, slams the door, mother jumps out of the bushes, opens the door, says, you're not going to treat my son that way. He's due, he has a right to his education. What do you think you're doing? Bus driver steps off the bus and goes, he was teasing me. That's what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, huh? I got a poem here. It's called Becoming Someone. Blocked by confusion, I forge a destiny through impulsive acts. Self-consciously, I enter situations where personality unfolds and world impacts on a sensitive soul. Personality creates self-consciousness. Just as attention, the eye, and the colorful shape trigger vision. Impact is the meeting of self-consciousness, senses, and the world. It leads to experience. I crave to have and I crave to avoid. Craving makes me cling, and senses, opinions, rules, and different selves. Clinging is to insist on being someone. Not to cling is to be free to be no one. To be someone is to be conscious, impulsive, thinking, feeling, which is born, ages, and dies, suffers torment, grief, and pain, depression and anxiety. Anguish emerges when someone is born. Impulsive acts are the root of life. Fools are impulsive. The wise see things as they are. When confusion stops through insight, impulsive acts cease. Stop this, and that will not happen. Anguish will end. A lot of people who've been around for a while get to a new resentment inventory and they don't find any resentments because you and I, frankly, don't live with a lot of deep-seated resentment anymore. I was encouraged, if we're looking for the things within ourselves which are blocking us from others, from God, and myself, no separation, just like Mark said. I'm going in there to discover that stuff that is currently blocking me. It will be a manifestation of the current unmanageability, the current self-will, the current agnosticism. So try this. Work with other words other than resentful at. Who's let you down? Who's discouraged you? Who are you jealous of? Because we live with more subtle forms of things, not less dangerous, but less abrasive, less coarse, more subtle forms of things that are blocking us. Ask God to reveal to you the things within yourself which are blocking you. I like to do the way Mark said, where I work on my first column until the first column is done. When do you know the list is done? When you know the list is done. I think this last time going through with Mark, I had 35 in the first column. People, institutions, and principles. And that was basically looking back at a 2-year period. Sometimes people in the program, when they hear that you're in inventory again, they think things like, what are you doing, writing the same inventory you wrote 20 years ago? No. I've been awakened through the first 3 steps to stuff that I've missed in the last period of time since I finished amends that I was asleep to in 10, 11, and 12. That's still there. It's still festering. It's still being refelt. It's still stuck. It might be discouragement. It might be I've been let down. It might be I've been hurt. I'm jealous. Blah, blah, blah. I just ask God to show me the things within myself which are blocking me from others, myself, and Him as one. I work on the list till I know it's done. Then, like Mark said, if let's say for the first person on my list, I have 4 things, 4 resentments, 4 whatever, A, B, C, D. I like to do 1 resentment per page. 1 page for every second column. So for Charlie, if I have A, B, C, D, that's going to be 4 pages of inventory. Because what my ego would like to do, and I'm sure those of you that work with others have seen before, the ego would like to smush it all together. Put about 10 second columns and try to squeeze in 10 third columns and this much space for the 4th column. Don't be afraid of paper. Don't be afraid of paper. There's plenty of paper. 1 resentment for each page. 1 page for every second column. So I work on the second column until it's done. This is on another notebook. Then I finally have the first and second column done. I take the first one off the list and I number it. And I put the name. And I put the first resentment, A. If I have 4 more, I'm going to make 4 more pages. And then I put which of those 7 areas were hurt, threatened, or interfered with. When she left me, see, and I think that's the truth. I still think in that state of consciousness that she left me. It's the truth. It is the truth. It's the truth that I would rather die than have to face that it maybe isn't the truth. So I put her name in the first column, that she left me in the second column, and then I asked myself, when she left me, did it affect my self-esteem, how I feel about me? Yes, self-esteem. Did it hurt what others see or feel about me? Yes, pride. Did it hurt what I want? Yes, ambition. Did it hurt what I need to be okay? Yes, security. What about our personal relation and other personal relations of people that saw that? Yes, personal relations. Sex relations? Yes. Pocketbook? Maybe, yes. Then people that have encouraged us, and remember, those of you that do the work, don't look down on things that are revealed to people doing the work that aren't necessarily word for word in the book. Remember, our founders ended the 164 pages with a statement. They'd only been doing it 4 or 5 years. What, Bill got sober in 34? 35? Someone? 4 years later, the book's published. When the book came out, which hasn't been changed, nobody had more than 5 years. And they said, more would be revealed. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. So, some of our heroes, when they got to that line that Mark read, you see, because it's on the page where the first 3 column example is. They knew that the 4th column was like a page and a half away, but it still said, when we were finished, we considered it carefully. And they started to ask, when she left me, why did it affect my self-esteem? Because I'm no good? Because of low self-esteem? Sorry, that's usually a lie. It's because I have a little bit too much self-esteem. People are just starting to talk about in America high self-esteem and the damage it does to children. You know, at home they're told you're a perfect angel, a wonderful child of the universe. And then they meet someone in the world that says that they're not, and they like blow everybody away in the school, right? High self-esteem is sometimes my problem. Because see, I didn't stay resentful because when she left me, I'm no good and I didn't deserve her. If that was the truth at the core of my being, I'd sit there like somebody with no self-esteem. Well, I don't deserve you anyway, honey, as she's walking out the door. But I'm still angry. Why? Because there's a part of me that believes I'm above anybody leaving me. I'm a perfect boyfriend. Self-esteem. I am. This is not about thoughts and beliefs. This is about what your ego tells you you are. Now, don't think you're discovering the truth in the third column. These are the lies that your ego tries to tell you are true. Your first inventory, if it's a big one, just put the words or do what your sponsor says. But if you've been around and you get it, ask why was your self-esteem. And usually, when you think it was low self-esteem, it was high self-esteem. And usually when you think it was high self-esteem, it was low self-esteem. You're just fooling yourself. That's why you stayed angry. If you were in the truth, you wouldn't have stayed angry. What about ambition? When she left, did it affect what I wanted? Yeah. I wanted her to stay no matter what I did. That's what I wanted. Security. This is always life and death for the ego. I need her to stay to exist, to be okay. You know, like most of those R&B songs that are really codependent songs, I'm nothing without you, right? My world is empty without you, babe, right?
You complete me.
You are my everything, right? We make people into God and God into people, right? What about, that's my security. What about personal relations? No friend should leave me, and no friend should ever see me. Me who? Mr. AA. Perfect boyfriend. No one should see me being left. Sex relations. These are my beliefs about men and women and how they interact. Women don't leave men. Men leave women. Boom. Pocketbook. No one leaving me should interfere with my money. I think it's mine. I actually think it's mine. And that's insanity with unfinished amends because you're spending their money. It's their money. It's not my money. It's a gift in the first place. I turn the page, and then I do the third column on everybody. I think one of the best descriptions that Mark and I have ever heard of how people die with those beliefs, and I wish we had time today, I don't think we do, to do what Mark likes to do with the theater of the lie, but the best picture I've ever seen of that is a man who after many years and did very little work became a speaker. Went to the doctor one day. Doctor said, you have a problem with your appendix. You better be at the hospital tomorrow at 5 o'clock. We'll do whatever it's called. Appendix. The guy couldn't. He just couldn't get to the hospital. Why? Because he's a speaker. And you never say no to an AA request. That belief destroys more families and loved ones and children and wives and vice versa in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous than any belief. It precludes intuition, prayer, God. He couldn't go to the hospital because he's a speaker now. He went and spoke, boom, his appendix burst, he's in the hospital, dying of peritonitis. And I think back then there was nothing they could do if your appendix burst. You're just going to die of this poison in your body. And our friend Frank went to visit him every day. And he said he watched this man go through the inventory process right in front of him. One day he would say, you know, I wasn't the greatest father in the world, but you know I wasn't the worst. And he could feel another one of those personalities die. He said, you know, I wasn't the greatest father in the world, but I wasn't the worst. And he would feel another one die. And he said, day after day, it took him 17 days to die. When he was lucid, he would come to the realization that we get to do right here in inventory. Because see, it's not about low self-esteem or high self-esteem. It's about healthy self-esteem. You know, I'm not the greatest boyfriend in the world. I'm also not a piece of crap. I'm a guy with 21 years of sobriety trying to do the best he can who makes mistakes. I'm human. You face your humanness in the insanity of your beliefs in the third column, whether they're high or low. You know, if they're high or low, the ego wins either way. The ego loves it if it has you the worst or the best. It can't stand just one of the guys. Average. An average guy doing an average job, trying to do the best he can. The ego hates that. I do the third column on everybody. I turn the page and I start to look for the truth because all of it's a lie. I'd like to share one more thing with you that I do with the fourth column now. I never got the check thing because my sponsor told me that the big book says, where was I selfish? Not were you selfish? Check. Were you dishonest? Because here's how I'm going to share with you how important the fourth column is. 5 steps come from the fourth column. The truth in inventory, exact nature of your defects. The truth in 6, 7, the truth you need for 8, and the truth you need to go to somebody to make amends. 5 steps come from a clear fourth column. Steps 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. My book says, where was I selfish? I write, I was selfish when I did this and didn't do this. 3 kinds of dishonesty. There are 3 kinds of dishonesty. Outright lies, lies of omission. What's more dishonest? Lying to her about it or not telling her at all? One is not more than the other. And then there's self-delusion, which I've seen all through the 3rd column. Where was I selfish? Where was I self-seeking? Where was I dishonest? And where was it rooted in fear? Now what I do is, let's say with this resentment, she left me, and all these things were affected because of these beliefs, and this is what I did or didn't do, and this is where I was afraid. I stay in the 4th column until I can rewrite the first 2 columns. And I stay in the 4th column until I have a realization like this. Holy moly, she didn't leave me. I drove her away with selfishness, dishonesty, self-seeking, and fear. And I put myself for driving her away at the bottom. I do that on every resentment. And then I take those and I write 4 columns on those, and they're either toward me or God. And I don't know why I saw it more today when Mark read it, but I really saw that line. And then we're sore at ourselves. And I believe this. Resentment is anger towards self held on to, focused on somebody else, when it's really a resentment toward yourself. I just had an inventory with 35 in the 1st column. I did the 1st and 2nd column again at the bottom of every 4th column, and there was about 10 toward myself, and there was about 5 toward God. I took those and I wrote 4 columns on those, and Mark said, you didn't even need to read the rest of those 35 pages. That'll help you with amends, but those last 4 or 5 pages was the inventory. Have you ever written inventory about a resentment toward God? Yourself? Have you ever made amends to yourself or God? Now, we can't hurt God, but we can certainly do a lot to hurt that relationship. And that whole inventory came down to resentments and delusion and disappointment and having let myself down. And it was all toward me and God. And then I write a fear inventory. I find my fears in my 4th column. I like to write 4-column inventory. I like to write 4-column fear inventory. But if you start with a big list of fears, you should break them down by asking, why am I really afraid of that? Because it's painful. Why am I afraid of that? Because I'll die. Why am I afraid of that? Because I'll live. Why am I afraid of that? Because I won't drink. And you end up with about 10 negative fears and 10 positive fears. Negative fears, drink, die, alone, abandoned, in pain. Positive fears, alive, not drinking, with power. See, I believe most of us in this room are much more afraid of having power than we are remaining powerless and irresponsible. Nelson Mandela wrote a wonderful poem, I wish I had it, about how we're more afraid of the light than we are the darkness. We're more afraid of truth than we are remaining irresponsible and powerless. And it's sad to me, because of the awakening that I've had, that many, many, many people with long-term sobriety still think that they're powerless over alcohol and that their life is unmanageable. What kind of message is that for a new person? My truth is, something has come between me and alcohol, and I'm not drunk. The power of God has come into my life, and I have a manageable life. I can use proper use of the will. I can make decisions along these lines. I'm living the way I want to live, and if you're not, where's the promise of Alcoholics Anonymous? If the problem is powerlessness, with no choice but to drink, in an unmanageable life internally as it's manifested externally, then shouldn't the solution be there's something between you and alcohol, and you have the power in your life to manage your life? You make mistakes. It talks about that. So I do 4 columns on fear. I see that there's usually only 2. And whatever you come down to, those 2 fears will be summed up by this. Here we are again. Whether to die an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Because I'm afraid of dying, and I'm afraid of living, and I'm afraid of not having power, and I'm afraid of having power. And there they are. Boom. And then I take a list of relationships. The sex inventory isn't necessarily about sex. Mark says it's about the opposite sex. Not in some cases. Right? Sometimes it's about the same sex. Sometimes it's about sex that's jumbled up nowadays. Men with men, men with girl, men, this and that. I look at the relationships God reveals to me to make in that list. And I put myself, and I put God, I remember this woman in Denver that said, have you ever answered the 9 questions from the sex inventory about your relationship with God? And it was amazing. What I do that's inconsiderate and selfish arouses jealousy, suspicion, and bitterness in me. And because I'd had a period of time where I had chosen to be celibate, there was only one person in my life that I have a relationship based on my sane and sound ideal from the last piece of work, and that is that I am to remain celibate until I'm with somebody where there's that kind of a commitment. And she was there. And I answered those 9 questions. But I think sometimes those of us that do the work, we forget the importance of the ideal. The book says it's a chosen ideal. Ask God to mold it. It's between you and God. Advice from other people is good, but we let God be the final judge. Just like they say with everything, even amends, place the outcome in God's hands. I have a sane and sound ideal that I live up to today because the power is there. It tells me what will happen if I make mistakes. I'll be forgiven. But if my conduct continues to harm others, and I don't see that with just sexual behavior, because I don't see sexual behavior separate from myself, God, or you from any other kind of behavior that's selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, rooted in fear. I have a sex ideal that's grounded in reality. It tells me what to do if my conduct continues to hurt others. Many people that do the work, that come out the other side of amends, have a delusion, which is a first step reservation, that they can keep doing that kind of behavior and not pay a price. And it kills us. God's going to make that possible. And I write my ideal. And from time to time, the people in my life that I've given consent ask me, is that within your sane and sound ideal? And then I take this to someone and I read it. I usually do more than one 5th step. Remember, even in the short form of step 4, it uses the word once again that we've been focusing on this weekend, fearless and searching. I believe if you took 10 people, put them each in a different room, locked the door, and told them each something different about inventory, that's probably about the experience they would have. Tell this person it's going to be a horrible experience. That's probably what they'll have. Tell them that discovering the truth is going to set you free. That's probably the experience they're going to have. You're really going to enjoy this inventory. That's probably the experience they're going to have. If you find yourself in the 4th column, beating yourself up, go back to the statement, our troubles are of our own making, and find the positive side to the statement till you can go back into the 4th column. For example, let's say I'm writing the 4th column about her leaving me, and it just feels like I'm not doing anything productive. I'm just beating myself up. I go back to that statement and I sit with it until I can come back to the inventory and say this: thank God my troubles were of my making, because if they were of her making, she's either got to change, see the light, or come back for me to get free. And they don't have to. My dad's been dead since I was 21, but he still owned me when I was 30. How am I going to get free if he's dead? A lot of people said I couldn't make amends to someone who was dead. Not true. A lot of people said I couldn't get free with someone who was dead. Not true. Thank God my troubles in that relationship were of my own making, decisions I made based on self, which placed me in a position to be hurt. It was funny, I was in New York doing a small retreat in December. You can imagine some of these tough New York guys, so I said, how many people in the room believe in karma? And these guys are like, what's one of those new age ideas, right? A couple hands went up. I said, how many of you believe what goes around comes around? They believe that, right? It's the same thing. My books, I believe the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous believes in karma. One of the greatest statements that describes karma that I've ever heard is, at some time in the past, we made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. Where every one of them was toward myself or God. Yeah. What about a couple questions about inventory that maybe are common among us, or any confusion about the mechanics of inventory, or Anything at all someone is confused about? Yes, sir. I couldn't hear you.
Can you come up and maybe do it in the microphone so they have it on tape, maybe? I think that microphone is on right there. You can go ahead. Yeah, I can pull it out of there if you want.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dale, alcoholic. I just wanted to add that after doing several inventories, I came to the conclusion that where it talks about where we turn back to the list again in step 4, on the 4th column, it says where we've been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. And I did identify each of those in every instance. And then I went to a 5th column and wrote down, what did I do? What was my part? And that really helped me making the correlation between that I was selfish and that the action that was attached to my instinct.
It's a great point. And the guy that does the workbook from our group in Santa Monica, he also has you do similar to what he said, where did I set the ball rolling? And where have I done that very same thing to somebody else? And of course, if harm comes to you that was caused to that person, or sometimes you're writing about one person, and before you're done with that resentment, 3 or 4 other names that you've done the same stuff with. You could make notes about other people. You could make notes about harm. Remember, in the 4th column, you're just looking for the truth. You're looking for the truth about what did you do based on that selfishness, dishonesty, self-seeking, and fear. Where did you start the ball rolling? Yeah. But it's an amazing thing to find out the first 3 columns are all a lie. Yeah. I'll try to describe, and then Mark can add to it because he's the one that's really good at theater of the lie. But imagine a circle right here with 30 people. And you got a blackboard. And you have someone give a resentment. And it's a guy. And he says, she left me. He brings him and he puts him inside the circle, kind of at that edge. And then he gets a girl to represent the one who left him. Put her inside the circle, and she's the one that left him. Now, he writes, she left me. And you start to ask this guy, who did she leave? What do you mean, who did she leave? Who did she leave? Well, she left me. No, me who? And they don't get it. Me who? They don't get it. And then all of a sudden they'll get a little angry and they'll say, well, you know, I do have a reputation in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it didn't look good when she left. So you bring up Mr. AA and you stand him next to him. And then there's going to be Rambo, and there's going to be Romeo, and there's going to be the businessman, there's going to be the unworthy son, there's going to be Mr. AA, and he's got all these personalities standing around this guy. Then he does the same thing with her. Who left him? She doesn't get it. Who do you mean, who? Me who? Well, you know, I am a businesswoman in the 90s, and I have a 5-year agenda, and he brings up the businesswoman, and Juliet, and the sex goddess, and the unworthy daughter, and the mother, and the daughter, and you got all these personalities standing around her. And he goes, now I'm going to show you why you're having trouble with personal relations. And he keeps reminding you, remember, this is when you're not at one. He's mad because she left, and she's mad for whatever reason she left. Neither of them are dealing with the truth. But the reason they're having trouble with personal relations, they're not at one, is all these personalities have arisen, and one morning the sex goddess wakes up to the businessman. He's got a 9 o'clock appointment. She wants to make love, and boom, they're like this. Vice versa, the next day, Romeo wakes up to the businesswoman. They're like this. And the only time you have a good day when you're not at one is when the right 2 personalities wake up at the same time. Then he goes further. I'll show you another reason why you're having trouble. And he asks each of the personalities how they felt when she left. How did Rambo feel? I wanted to kill her. How did Mr. AA feel? Live and let live. Right? How did the unworthy son feel? Don't deserve it anyway. Every one of those personalities has a different belief and a different feeling about when she left. Same with her. He said, there's another reason you're having trouble with personal relations. Then he says, so now you start to discover some truth. Man, I wasn't the greatest boyfriend in the world. This personality dies. man, I'm not the greatest lover in the world. I'm selfish. This one does. You admit truth, these personalities are smashed. He said, during that period of admission, like fourth column, fifth step, you have to be very careful that the ego doesn't start to say, wow, look at what I've been. So now I'll just... And he showed how all the personalities would do is get up and change seats. The passive guy goes for a class in assertiveness training, right? The businessman goes to a class on how to be more a sensitive lover. And he graphically showed us how if you start to play the so now I'll game, recreating yourself in a new image, not only do you end up with a whole new third column, all the personalities do is get up and change seats. The whore becomes a nun. The nun becomes a whore. The passive guy needs to be a little more aggressive. Be careful when discovering truth that you don't start to create yourself. Let God do that as He would have you, the good and the bad, give Him it all.
You can have some fun with that is look at your own life and you can identify 6 to 8 major roles that your ego has perpetuated that you think define who you are. I recently did some work with a woman in Houston, Texas, who in 1 week had 5 of those stripped from her. She called me going insane, saying, who am I? And what happened was her husband left, so the wife was fighting for her existence. Her son was gone, so the mother's fighting for her existence. They were going to have to sell the house because he wanted the divorce, so the homeowner was fighting for her existence. They had been Mr. and Mrs. AA down in that neck of the woods. And now they were separated, and so that was gone. And she literally didn't have a clue who she was. And I said to her, what an incredible, wonderful experience you get to have. Of course, that is not what she wanted to hear. She said, what are you talking about? And I said, because you become attached to all of them. And then depending on, over the next couple of months when I did some work with her, I could always tell which one of them was calling me. Sometimes the wife would call very angry. Sometimes the spiritual woman would call, and of course she understood, and she was kind, loving, and forgiving. Sometimes the homeowner would call, and she was angry because she'd put a lot of time and effort and work in this home. And ceremoniously one day I told her, go out in the back of your yard. I want you to dig 5 graves. I want you to bury those. That's not who you are. I live in a world of impermanence, and I'm in the world to play the role that God has assigned. Do not attach to the role. That's freedom. See? You're in a one-act play, and every day it shifts and changes, and you don't get to decide your role. That's already gets decided. You just get to play the role for a day, but don't attach to it. That's when you get to go through life being a free man, a free woman.
That's why they say in connection to the fear inventory, remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. We always think we're going to have to do something about all this stuff. What do we, like they say, relax and take it easy after you've discovered something that crops up. Right? We always think we're the ones that have to do something, deal with it, cope with it, work on it, figure it out, fix it. I've seen through fear. Now, does that mean I don't ever have any fears? No. Los Angeles right now has been, for me, an experience where the whole energy in the entire city is just riddled with fear. Do I have to be dominated by that? No. Can I move into faith at any moment? Yes. Is it a scary time in our history of this planet? Yes. But we don't... I used to admire Michael Moore, this guy that got in trouble at the Academy Awards, and he's got a pretty good book called Stupid White Men. And I saw him on Oprah the other day, and I saw through the delusion that he's trying to sell. Because he's got some pretty good ideas, but he's saying people shouldn't be afraid of this and this and this and this. They're afraid of the wrong things. They should be afraid of this and this and this and this. And I thought, you're doing the same thing that you're blaming the people that are programming us to be afraid are doing. You're just saying it should have another name, and you're not telling people how to get free of fear. The way to see through fear when you discover one is to ask yourself, ask God to show you, what is the idea behind this fear, rooted in self-reliance, that I can do something about this fear without God, and the fear can disappear. Right? How many times have you heard in this program, fear and faith can't exist in the same place? What a trick that one is. Fear and faith better be in the same place when I really need it is when I'm afraid. God is there. I think sometimes negative emotions are not only negative, they're really helpful, and we have a bad attitude about them in AA. You know, sometimes for new people, fear gets a bad rap. when it's actually a reflection of your becoming human? My God, you haven't been afraid of anything in years, and all of a sudden you're 6 months sober and you're able to say, I'm afraid. Could that possibly be a reflection that you care? Fear and shame get a bad name in L.A., and they tell newcomers you shouldn't be afraid or ashamed. My God, if you've lived anything like any of us have lived, and you're not ashamed or afraid, they have places for people like that. It's called a sociopath. No conscience. I saw this movie with Deborah Ringer and Anthony Hopkins, and she's dying of cancer. And he's just riddled with pain. And she pulled him out of it by one simple thing. She said to him, don't you see that your pain is a reflection of how much you love me? And it's just the other side of the love that you have for me? Next time somebody gets really angry at you, and you have the nerve to do this, and they get in your face, and they're really angry, look at them and say, wow, you must be really afraid. You'll either get your ass kicked or they'll get free, but one way or the other. Because we all know, and that's the easy one to see. It's so easy to see in your first resentment inventory that underneath every resentment, you're really afraid. Wow, I thought I was a tough guy in the penitentiary. I was a scared kid. Right? But here's the tricky one. If resentment is a mask to hide fear, what is fear a mask to hide? Fear is a mask to hide agnosticism and self-reliance. It's the hardest one to see through. And our book says it. It's a conscious decision. It should be classed with stealing. Didn't we ourselves set the ball rolling? And fear is because self-reliance fails. Fear is always rooted in self-reliance.
We'll talk about the fear inventory a minute. The extent to which I was attached to those roles is the extent to which fear drove my life. Fear is the driving force behind virtually every amend that I've ever made. Fear leads to this sense of separation I have from you, my true self, and God. So I want to talk about this. Page 67 of the big book talks about that. Fear is about 5 lines up from the bottom. Fear somehow touches every aspect of my life. Get a conscious awareness of that. Is that true? What constitutes your life situation? Well, your finances, personal relationships, your physical health, your emotional health, your mental health, your career, if you have children, etc. Does it touch every aspect of your life? I'll give you something to work with. Perhaps you may be asleep to areas of your life in which you're still experiencing fear, areas of your life in which you're still relying on self. Wake up to that. I'll say that again. Areas of your life in which you are experiencing fear are areas of your life in which there is no God and you're still relying on self, and you may be asleep to that. And it talks about what fear does. Fear is an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of my existence is shot through with fear. Boy, do I know that one. I remember being about 10 or 11 years sober, and I'm not sure what precipitated it again. I got in touch with this fear. And I remember driving down the road, and I'm just taking my fist and I'm punching the ceiling and saying, God, I am so sick of living my life based in fear. I am so sick of living my life based in fear. I will go to any lengths to be free of that. Surrender. Give up. Your life's not your business. Be present. Those are some things you do. Men of faith have courage. They trust their God. Realize you live in a world of impermanence. Get present to this moment. Love what you have for as long as I give it to you. Love the pain if it's gone. Fear, what does fear do? Fear will set in motion trains of circumstances, meaning I'm going to pursue a course of action which is going to bring me misfortune that I feel I did not deserve. And you're going to bring your I did not deserve into my meetings and talk to me about it. See? You set the ball rolling, right? How could they fire me? How could I get this health problem? How could she leave? How could she stay? See? But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Page 68, you get your instructions on fear inventory. You're going to review your fears thoroughly. You're going to put them on paper. You're going to ask yourself a question. Why do you have these fears? What a fabulous question. Here's why. Isn't it because self-reliance failed you? Self-reliance failed you. Is that true? So again, get current with your life. Any areas of your life in which you're having fear, ask yourself, how are you relying in self? Really ask yourself this: what role have I assigned myself in this area of fear? And it talks about there's a better way for now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. And I said to that woman I told you about in Houston that literally was stripped of everything in a week, I said, you get to trust and rely on God with all this, don't you? Why? Because everything, so many things that she thought defined who she were taken from her in such a quick fashion that she couldn't turn to self-reliance. She was left with nothing but trust and rely on God. And I said, now we're going to find out if you walk that talk. There's nothing worse than getting asked to speak a lot in AA and have extreme life-changing situations come up and find out if you're going to walk this deal. See, like it or not, you're on stage. People watch what goes on in your life. I've been through a lot of things since I got sober. Divorces and bankruptcy and physical health problems, and I've lived in several different places and different career changes and let go from jobs and PTSD and trauma from Vietnam and just locked up in a nut house and all kinds of stuff. Why? Because that's life. My life's not any different than anyone sitting in this room. That's life. And the sooner you get in touch with this power and you can get rid of free, then the sooner you can experience all of that. It's not necessary to drink. It's not necessary to go nuts. If you'd ever told me that I could experience great pain and great joy at the same time, I'd said you were nuts. I live in a world of relativity. It means you go from pain to joy. If I'd never had pain, how would I know what joy is? I thank God for everything. It means I'm still breathing. I'm alive. I'm not obsessed with I got to be happy all the time.
We bring a belief system into Alcoholics Anonymous from our alcoholism and our addiction that goes like this: I will do anything at any length to feel good, and whatever feels good is good, and whatever feels bad is bad. That pattern doesn't necessarily end because you stop drinking or using by the grace of God. Then it starts to show up in your life, and you've done the work, and you become so good at 10, 11, and 12. This is what she and I were talking about during the break. I had become so good at 10, 11, and 12 that my philosophy was, if it feels good, it's good. If it feels bad, it's bad. So avoid anything that makes me uncomfortable. And that's a big delusion about life. You're going to have loss. You're going to have grief. You're going to have pain. You're going to have joy. The key is to find peace in the middle of all of it. My mind used to say this: you cannot be physically, mentally, emotionally, or even spiritually in pain and have peace at the same time. Therefore, you must do whatever you can to get out what makes you uncomfortable. And all I had was a great technique of 10, 11, and 12 to avoid anything that made me feel uncomfortable. I later found out that life's going to go on. I'm going to get old. I'm going to experience illness. I'm going to experience loss. I'm going to experience sickness and death. The key is to find peace right in the middle of it before you have to get out of it, so your program doesn't become a pain avoidance program. God is in the middle of all of it. Go right into the middle of it. Don't become so good at 10, 11 you're just unable to feel anything, and you're just like... See, I believe the deeper we go into our pain, the more we experience joy. The deeper we go into our grief. A lot of us haven't even grieved alcohol. Our best friend, our higher power, came before anything or anyone. It guided us, it directed us, it protected us, it gave us power, and now you've lost that. I think the biggest part of letting go is grief. And a lot of us don't go through that grief, and it starts to manifest in other things. Held on to grief. 5 years in India, like Mark was saying, 5 years in India, it was pretty easy to say, gee, living life on a spiritual basis is wonderful. But in the last year, I've lost my mother. I've been had to leave a war zone, had to leave friends that might not ever see again because they just can't go get a visa and leave. There's been loss. And I've been more at peace than I've ever been in 20 years. Because I started to seek the peace in the middle of whatever, however it is, and continue to do the work.
We will see you back here at 2 o'clock. And we want to continue to move forward in the session. We want to talk about steps 5, 6, 7, 8. I will say this about inventory. The way you get experience with inventory is to write inventory. A lot of inventory. It can be extremely freeing. Someone asked me recently, I was reflecting back, I was just trying to think since 1991, I guess, so it's about 13 years or 12 years. But I strongly suspect I have written a minimum of probably 30 inventories in those 12 years. And then I do multiple fifth steps. Normally a minimum, I read normally a minimum of 3 people. So that would mean I read inventory 90 times in the last 12 years. And I do it because I like the effect produced. There's no other reason. I'm that kind of an alcoholic. So if you haven't done much work with inventory, I would strongly encourage you to do that. Tremendous freedom comes when you begin to write more with inventory. So we open our big books up to page 70. I do want to make one comment where it says to sum up about sex on page 70. There are 4 things in there to ask you to do, and I can tell you from experience those 4 things you can apply to any situation in your life. The book says, I earnestly pray for the right ideal. I've used this in business, personal relationships, etc. For guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. 4 great, incredible prayers to work with in any area of your life. So we get done with this inventory. The book goes on to say, if I've been thorough about this, I've written down a lot. I've listed and analyzed my resentments. I've begun to comprehend their futility and fatality. My resentments are futile because I can't do anything about the external world's actions or behaviors. They're fatal because they cut me off from God, from the power of God that I need in my life. That conscious contact. It says, I've commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. I've begun to learn tolerance, patience, goodwill toward all men, even my enemies, for I look on them as sick people. That shift in consciousness and how you perceive things. I've listed the people I've hurt by my conduct, and I'm willing to straighten out the past if I can. They're introducing us to steps 8 and 9 here, and telling us we're going to get this list from the inventory we wrote, in addition to prayer, seeking more. In this book I read again and again, faith did for me what I could not do for myself. It goes on to say that I'm convinced now that God can remove every self-will has blocked me off from Him. My self-will cannot remove my self-will. Power of God can eliminate my self-will. And it's my self-will always that blocks me off from conscious contact. So if I already made a decision, 3rd step, in an inventory of my grosser handicaps, 4th step, I made a big beginning. That being so, I've swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. So chapter 6, into action, talks about having made this inventory, what I do about it. Trying to get a new attitude. Step 2, new relationship with my Creator. Step 3, discover the obstacles in my path. Step 4, admitted certain defects, ascertain the rough way what the trouble is, put my finger on the weak items in my personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. This requires action. Now I'm going to get some, and then it goes on to talk about, I then will admit it to God, to myself, and to another human being, the exact nature of my defects. And I'm in the 5th step, and it talks about toward the bottom of this page, gives me a pretty good reason why I need to do this. If I skip this vital step, I may not overcome drinking. Tie me back to the 1st step again. talks about trying to avoid this humbling experience, I turned to easier methods. And the promise is almost invariably we're going to get drunk. See, you're back to something again. Die an alcoholic death, read this inventory. You know, it doesn't require a lot of thought. Pretty simple, given a choice. That's why you always have to remember your intent as you go through the steps. Die an alcoholic death, take the action predicated in the step. Which is easier for me to do. Talks about more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He's very much the actor. To the outer world, we like to present our stage character. Bottom of the page talks about how incredibly dishonest we are. We seldom tell people the whole truth, and we certainly do not follow anyone's advice. Unwilling to be honest with these men, we're honest with no one else. Small wonder many in the medical profession have a low opinion of alcoholics and their chance for recovery. Book over and over again talks about, and then finally says this manner of living demands rigorous honesty. My experience is it's very, very difficult to maintain any sense of peace, let alone sobriety, with a sustained course of dishonesty going on in your life. Regardless of how that dishonesty might show up. It says I must be entirely honest with somebody if I expect to live long or happily in this world. Now I get some instructions on who to choose to do this with. Middle paragraph, I need to find a closed-mouthed, understanding friend. It says I have no right to save my skin at another person's expense. I need to tell my story to someone who will understand yet be unaffected. Probably not a good rule for husbands to read inventory to wives, depending on what they have in there. The rule is, here's the rule, I'm hard on myself, considerate of others. Bottom of the page, it says we're anxious we talk to the right person. It gives me more instructions. This person needs to be able to keep a confidence. This person needs to understand and improve what I'm driving at. That understand is critical to me. My fifth step is about life and death, as the book's going to tell me. It's about the death of self-will and the life of an awakened spirit. Very, very important who listens to my fifth step. And more importantly, who gives me feedback in the fifth step. Talks about when I decide who's to hear my story, I waste no time. I explain to partner what I'm about to do and why I have to do it. My partner, whoever I'm reading this to, should realize I'm engaged upon a life and death errand. That's another sentence. I'm doing some of this intentionally. That's another sentence I would hope some of you in the next month bring up in an AA meeting. I think that's a fairly important sentence too, much like the other one, that this list holds the key to my future. This one talks about my fifth step as a life and death errand. And a great topic to bring up is, what is your experience with that? What does that mean to you? Do they really mean life and death? My experience is the book always means what it says, that it's a life and death errand. And then it says, I pocket my pride and go to it, eliminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the path. When I am either reading a fifth step or I'm listening to one, I always read from where I started over to here, because I want to be very clear about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and I want the person across from me to be very clear. And then I read the inventory. And I'm looking for feedback in inventory because inventory is quite often about my self-delusion. I'm not interested in someone having consideration for how I might feel about what they say to me. I'm very interested about my life. So it's about seeing the truth behind all those resentments, and look at the truth in fear, and then look at the truth in the selfish, self-centered sexual inventory. My relationships with people. The levels of dishonesty in my life. I'll give you a simple example. And I can give you many about fifth steps. This has to do with smoking again. Some of you are not going to be happy after I talk about this, but I'm reading an inventory down in Kerrville, Texas several years ago, and I don't know how it came up, but it came up about, I was asked a question after reading a piece of inventory, and the question was, do you have a job description in your workplace? I said, well, of course I do. He said, well, does it say in there that you have permission to smoke cigarettes on company time? And I said, no. He said, well, how many cigarettes a day do you smoke at work? I said, well, probably a minimum of 10 to 15, it depends. I've never worked at a job where I just sat at a desk. He said, well, how much time do you take? smoke a cigarette? And I said, I don't know, 3 to 5 minutes. And so he said, do you think 5 would probably be better? And I said, well, yeah, probably. So he said, if we just took 10 cigarettes a day times 5, he said, so if it's not in your job description, you're not being paid to smoke cigarettes, that means approximately an hour a day you're stealing from your company. I really wished he hadn't said that. But you know what? He's absolutely right. I've been stealing from that company for a long time. So when I got to amends, I went in and made amends for that. Made amends for that. Stealing time from them. Feeding that addiction. See? That's the kind of stuff, and I'll tell you what, that was very freeing for me. I asked them, what can I do to make that right? Of course, quite often, I don't know what a 40-hour week looks like. They appreciated me coming in and talking about that with them. But this is the kind of people that I need sitting across from me. See, I can do stuff like that, never enters my mind. You know, we're the kind of people that justify murder. We do. The most outrageous things. And so I need to have someone sitting across from me who can help me see the truth of all that. And again, the longer you're sober, recently I had an experience with a man, he's about 20 years sober, he's a circuit speaker. What he discovered was he had several resentments he could not get free of, and in the area in which he worked, he was the go-to guy. So I didn't know what to do, so he got a hold of me and he flew down and to Dallas. And we swapped fifth steps. And I was able to help him see some things that he could not see because his ego operated in another fashion, much more devious, based on kind motives, because I'm a spiritual man, that kind of thing. And he was really up against some stuff. So it's critical. So I find people that have experience. I'm not always concerned about length of time. I have a man I do quite a bit of work with. He's 29, 30 years sober. One woman, 38 years sober. Some men I sponsor, 5, 6, 7 years spoke. I've read inventory to all of them. I don't care. As long as they understand and approve what it is I'm driving at, to help me find the truth in this. So you get done with that, and then when you get to experience what are called the fifth step promises, which are some of the most powerful in the whole book. And I always like to talk about these. It says, once I've taken this step withholding nothing, I can be delighted. And here's the fifth step promises. I get to look the world in the eye. You ever noticed, particularly in the Western culture, how most people walk around with their head down? And you ever notice in the Western culture how much we avoid eye contact? Why do you think that is? Because we're a fear-based society. Because we're a society that's based on self-reliance. But I get to look the world in the eye today. All people, everywhere I go, strangers I meet, I get to look people in the eye today because of the work that I was able to do in this fourth and this fifth step. I can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Don't have to walk into my house anymore, fire up the television set, turn on the CD player, check on my computer at the same time. Be alone at perfect peace and ease. I understand that. When I first started to work with silence, it felt violent to me. Today, noise feels violent to me. But I can be alone at perfect peace and ease. My fears fall from me. What an incredible promise that is. Just think of the visual of that. Your fears fall from you. And I can tell you over the years, that's exactly what's happened to me. I'll never forget when Joe and I first started doing this, he lied to me, first of all, in the very first one we did. I'd never done one, and he said, well, there's a little group down in Lafayette, Louisiana, and they'd like us to come down, and I'd like to have you come along because I don't want to talk all weekend. And I thought, well, okay. So I drive down. Hey, there was it's in a hall like this, 300 people, right? Little group. I was terrified, absolutely terrified. My fears fall, and I keep doing this work. And I reached a place, actually, quite a few years ago, where I'll never forget where the first time, actually I think it was in a huge auditorium, I think it was down in Kentucky, must have been 1,000 people there, and I remember standing up there with as much calm and peace as if I was sitting in my living room with a good friend. And I said, this is an amazing deal, that a guy like me can have this kind of freedom from my fears, and they begin to fall away from me. I begin to feel the nearness of my Creator. That's why I drank. I was disconnected and felt separate from my Creator. And as a result of this work, I begin to feel the nearness of my Creator. I may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now I begin to have the spiritual experience. The feeling the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. I feel like I'm on the broad highway walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. What incredible, incredible promises. How could you not get excited about writing an inventory and doing a fifth step if this is the payoff? And I submit to you that if you've done that and this hasn't been the payoff, do it again. Find someone else who's maybe done more work who can give you better directions. But these are incredible promises to experience in your life. Get done with the fifth step. It says, I go home, find a place where I can be quiet for an hour. I believe there's spiritual virtue in following instructions. I take a timer and I set it for 60 minutes. I don't set it for 58 and I don't set it for 62. There's a part in me that the rules have never applied. Y'all know what I mean. Speed limit signs, just the lanes, the fast lanes for two people, but you're just by yourself because that looks like one for you. Everyone else is backed up and that's got the alcoholic's name on it, right? Rules don't apply to me. I can't stand waiting in line. Gotta wait 7 days. What? I mean, I've always been that kind of a guy, and what I found in this in this path is it teaches me some things by following these precise, specific, clear-cut directions. So I take that timer and I'm going to review what I've done. What have I done? I've looked at the first 5 steps, haven't I? I thank God from the bottom of my heart I know God better. Now, it took me a long time to understand the sentence because what I really just got through doing was reading 3 inventories to somebody. Resentment inventories, in which I finally got over to my 4th column, and I see how incredibly selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and fear-based I am. A fear inventory. And then a selfish, self-centered sex inventory. And I've read this to another person. And how is it I know God better? Did that ever confuse any of the rest of you? You ever wonder about that? Well, the reason I know God better is because I experience truth, and God is truth. This is the truth of how I've been living my life. And I verbalize it, and I talk about it, and I lay it out there. That's why I know God better. I'm not trying to be a stage character anymore. I finally sat down with another human being and laid out the truth of my life, my mistakes, a life based on self-will and self-reliance, which is why I know God better. See, it's paradoxical. We're raised in a society and culture which tells us to be dishonest if it will somehow help me get my way, but the truth is that makes me get separated further and further from God. And the honesty and truth of your life of admitting your mistakes. And then it says, I take this book down, I turn to the page which has the 12 steps, I read the first 5 proposals, have I admitted anything? So I look at that. Now you get some very interesting questions that have a lot more to do with construction, right? Is my work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? 2nd step, cornerstone. 3rd step, keystone. Have I skipped on the smith put into the foundation? Have I tried to make mortar without sand? Earlier on, the book had told you and I it's building a spiritual arch through which I walk a free man to free woman. Step 1, what is wrong with me is the foundation of that arch. Step 2 is the cornerstone. Step 3 is the keystone. Holds all the stones in place. Step 4 is another stone. Step 5 is another one. And then 6, 7, and then down to the last stone, which is the 12th step. And that completes the arch, and through that I walk a free man. That's what these questions are about. When I'm done with that hour and the timer goes off, I turn to page 76. If I can answer to my satisfaction those questions, I then look at step 6. I've emphasized willingness as being indispensable. And now I get the 6th step question. Am I ready to let God remove from me all the things I've admitted are objectionable? I use a tool for this, and the reason I do it, because it helps me identify the things that are objectionable better than any other tool, and that tool is called the Sacraments of Penance, in which they take the 7 deadly sins and embellish on them in a level I've never seen before. I use that tool because it's been the most effective I've ever seen to help me identify the exact nature of my defects. And I will tell you that every year, including last year when I went back through the steps, there's about, if you looked at that, there's probably 8 or 9 pages, extensive lists of defects that I never would have seen. And there probably were, out of everything on there might have been 10 or 15 I wasn't guilty of last year. Particularly if you have time in the program, it is an incredible tool to free you of spiritual pride, to get honest about how much you still fall short, in spite of how much you love God, in spite of how long you've been sober, in spite of what you've been doing. And now, so the question is, am I ready to let God take those? Can He now take them all? And then I do the 7-step prayer. And then brings me up to my 8th step. And I have a list of names and institutions from my inventory. And then I also spend some time in prayer and ask God to reveal anything else that needs to be on that list. And then something comes every single time. And I'll talk a little bit more about the list in a little bit.
I'm Joe. I'm an alcoholic. I had a little story I'd like to read. It was battered and scarred, and the auctioneer thought it was scarcely worth his while to waste his time with an old violin. But he held it up at the auction with a smile. "What is my bid, good people?" he cried. "Who starts the bidding for me? $1, $1, $2, who makes it $3? $3 once, twice, $3 twice, going for $3, but no." From the room far back, a gray-bearded man came forward and picked up the bow, wiped off the dust from the old violin, tightened up the strings. He played a melody pure and sweet as an angel's song. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice that was quite quiet and low, said, "What now is my bid for this old violin?" as he held it up with its bow. 1,000, 1,000, do I hear 2,000? Who makes it 3? 3,000 once, 3,000 twice, going and gone. The audience cheered, but some of them cried, "We don't understand. What changed the worth of the violin?" Swift came the reply from the auctioneer, "The touch of the master's hand." And many a man whose life is out of tune, all battered with bourbon and gin, is auctioned cheap to a thoughtless crowd, much like the old violin. A mess of potage, a glass of wine, a game, and he travels on. He's going once, he's going twice, he's going, almost gone. But the master comes, and the foolish crowd never can quite understand the worth of a soul, the change that is brought by the touch of the master's hand. I like that. Like I said, I was given this gift in 1982 in Denver. And there were times early on, and there was times since when I didn't remember it was a gift. I took it for granted. And I was 5 years in Denver, and then 10 years in Santa Monica, and then 5 years in northern India. And then I've been back now a year. And in the last year, we've been a few places. I've spent 2 months in New York, and 6 months in Texas, and a few months in Los Angeles, and I see a common denominator, and I'm talking now about groups where they do the work in the Big Book. And what I noticed was in a lot of these places, there's a lot of friction that I don't think is necessary among people that do the work. Personalities, dogma, rigidity, and I don't know. And I love the traditions. They were never soft-sold to me. They were never, and I don't know if they use this phrase in Arizona, but in California, actually in the format of a meeting sometimes they'll say, the traditions are to the group they've just told you 1/3 of the program is not for you personally. My sponsor didn't make that assumption, and he told me that there was as many spiritual principles within the traditions that I could practice in my life, business, family, etc., as there are in the 12 steps, as there are in the 12 concepts. And so I was thinking about this phenomena that we've seen around the country among among the fellowship of the Spirit. You know, our big book describes two fellowships. One at the beginning of the work, I believe it's on page 17, where they describe that cement, and they describe the feeling that many of us have had when we've walked into these rooms. The spirit of the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Joy and escape from disaster, camaraderie. But then it's funny that at the end of the process, I think it's right around page 164, they describe the fellowship of the Spirit rather than just the spirit of the fellowship. And they say that here and there, once in a while, you will meet an alcoholic who's had a vital spiritual experience. Now, I believe there's alcoholics that have had spiritual experiences, but they didn't believe it was vital. It was just nice. It wasn't about life and death anymore. I've been places, and I'm sure many people in this room have been places where, in a big meeting where people are sharing, one guy, you're visiting, you're from out of town, one guy can say one thing, and you just feel like you've met another brother in this fellowship of the Spirit. And I believe that's a fellowship within the fellowship of people who've experienced conscious contact, spiritual experience. And I think it's sad we're already enough of a minority that we start separating ourselves from each other, those that we share a common solution with judgment and gossip and criticism and rigidity. And I was wondering, when I was praying one morning, what I could say to this group in New York, and it dawned on me, the first tradition. And the first tradition states that our common welfare, let's just say, of your home group, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. So how does that break down? The group comes first. But my personal recovery depended on the unity and the message of that group. So what started to come to me was, as important as my personal recovery depends on the unity of the group, don't ever forget this, it works backwards. The unity of the group depends on your personal recovery. I believe if a group is continuing, if the individuals in a group are continuing to do the work, make amends, talk to each other, be accountable, you wouldn't have a lot of these splits among people that really shouldn't be. We really shouldn't be split from anybody, and that's what my inventory shows me. So first of all, it has to be about life and death. Does the unity of Alcoholics Anonymous still have something to do with your personal recovery? And conversely, does your personal recovery bring about unity around you? And I believe it does. In my last fifth step, Mark made a point that throughout that fifth step there was a phrase or a word that continued to show up that was causing me problems, and that was the word friend. I have a preconceived idea what that means. I sometimes take it for granted, and I sometimes assign that title to people that aren't my friends. And I always remember one of my heroes, Frank, saying, "Be friends with your friends, but know who your friends are, or you'll find yourself blindsided by people who aren't." You know, and I would read something to Mark in this fifth step, and he'd say, "Boy, you sure use that term friend a lot." Were they really a friend? And were you really a friend? You know, it's funny. I expect people to be a lot more than I expect from myself.
He was friends with people he didn't even like.
Yeah. I think I was about 10 years sober, and I saw my grand sponsor, Gary Brown. And I had known him for 10 or 12 years. And I saw him after not seeing him for a period of time, and he was just glowing. He was about 25, 26 years sober. I'd known him for about 10. And I asked him, I said, "Gary, what's going on? I mean, you're just like, I've never seen you like this." He said, "Well, I took an inventory to Chicago to my sponsor, who's Paul Martin. And I read it to a few people. And they sat down with me, and I saw some amends that I have not been aware of, some financial stuff. And I went home and talked to